you from the beautiful city of Melbourne. I would like to warmly welcome Travis, who's one of our project managers. Hello, Travis. Today we're going to be talking about basic skills for translators when it comes to project management. But what we're really going to be talking about is how to communicate, how to work as a team, and how to get the best out of the relationship that we have with you, our esteemed translators and interpreters. And we've got about 60 people participating, which is a great number, and more joining us. This is also being streamed live on Facebook. And just a reminder that afterwards you can access these webinars on our YouTube channel and all over the place through our social media. Just by way of introduction, I can tell you that you can submit questions through the chat box in your Zoom platform if you logged in. Everything's recorded and will be presented on YouTube if you ever want to get it. I should also tell you that Andrea, who is the brain and the face behind this series of webinars, gets a lot of questions from everyone, and sometimes she cannot answer because of the volume of it. So we have put together a few instructions that you will receive in an email when you register that tell you where to go if you want to know about things like NATI certification and points and all other bits and pieces. So it might not always be possible for Andrea to reply to you directly, but we put together a fact sheet and other information about how to acquire information that you might need. So Travis, you can see his photo on the screen. He's been working for Polaron for about 18 months now, which seems both a long time and a short time because it's a very fast-paced environment. And Travis is very tech savvy. So when it comes to anything computer, anything to do with technology, he is your man. And I've said that before, I'm saying it again. So let's move on to the next slide. And those of you that work with us regularly, you'll know who we are, but we are growing in terms of how busy we are. So the number of projects, the number of staff. So if you're working with us regularly, you've seen new people being in contact with you probably. And it's a very good thing. We're very pleased, but we're also very busy. So that's one of the things we're going to be talking about to you today. And I'll just get the next slide up. We do a lot of what we call community approved translation. And what it is, it's a service, it's a product co-designed essentially with your community. So what that means is if we're developing a brochure, we will go to the community that it concerns to help us develop the content, not just the content, but also the format that we present our things in. Nowadays, of course, both you and I know that people don't read stuff. So developing a 20-page brochure and putting it on our website just doesn't cut it anymore. We develop videos, we develop podcasts, we do animations, all kinds of things to ensure that the community who's the recipient of the work that we do will get the information in the right format, in the right way, at the right time. Okay. So today's session is really, so you have the agenda for today on your screen there, but we're going to be talking about what's it like for a project manager from start to finish. So the next 45 minutes or so will be covering things like, what does it look like from behind the scenes for Travis? We're going to be talking about the 10 ingredients of a successful translation project, and benefits of why it makes sense to have a project management approach to translation projects, and also how to improve communication when you work, whether it's with Polaron or somebody else, or whether you're handling projects for yourself. So you might be working directly with your own clients. What are some of the principles that we can share with you to help you be more effective, manage stress a bit better? And the last point we're going to cover is how all that relates to you. What can we share with you in terms of some of the tips and guidelines that you can apply to your daily work? All right, so that is Travis. And yes, he does have a beard now. And yes, he does 6 pairs of arms, or however many you see on the screen. But basically, I wanted to put an image up on the screen to tell you what it's like for Travis every day, in and out. and how many things he needs to manage and how many things he needs to be across. And what I'm going to ask Travis is about a typical project that he might handle, or one that was actually the biggest he's ever done. So over to you, Travis. Tell us, what is the biggest project you've ever done? How many people did you work with? What were some of the challenges? What happened?
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Eva. Hello, everyone. Hope you're all having a great day so far and you're all keeping safe at the moment. So yes, very interesting question. The biggest project that I have ever worked on. So there's a few that actually come to mind. The biggest one that I can think of that comes straight to my head is one that we worked on around August last year for the Aged Care and Safety Quality Commission. Now with this project, it basically involved 25 languages that they wanted to get some posters, some brochures and some videos completed in a fairly strict deadline. So just off the bat there, this was also done obviously via community approved translation. So off the bat, we've got 25 translators for this project. We've got 25 checkers and we've got 25 community checkers. Now, I'm no mathematician, but that basically adds up to 75 different vendors for that project. And that's without considering things like DTP, voice recording, and editing of the actual project. So if we look at that from a different perspective, that's around 100 different vendors on one project. So quite a massive amount of group of people working on one project. Safe to say it was definitely a very eventful procedure, especially setting everything up. You can imagine, especially going through each step of the process, there was definitely a lot of email correspondence and communication required. I can definitely tell you that, waking up in the morning for work and seeing around 50 to 60 emails in your inbox can be quite a daunting task to start with, but it's definitely something that you get used to over time. Obviously, with those different factors in mind, we have to make sure that we can get everything on track, because at the end of the day, it's all about the client's needs and making sure that we fulfill everything as accurately as possible. So we need to make sure we're obviously being very vigilant in how we're completing our jobs, but making sure everything's on track, that we're covering all aspects of a project, and ultimately that the client is happy at the end.
And Travis, how do you stay sane with so many moving parts? Because essentially, if you think about it, what happens in a project like that is that, and we'll show that on the screen in a moment, but everyone's got the best intention. You develop plans, you develop budgets, you know who you're going to be working with, and then even the smallest part of that ecosystem, if that falls apart, then it's like a domino effect, isn't it? Lots of things could go wrong just because of that one tiny little thing not working out quite as well as we would have hoped.
Of course. Yeah, definitely 100% agree when you talk about a domino effect. Yeah, when we have one thing that sort of goes a bit out of whack, especially during the start or even the middle of the process, it can throw a bit of things out of whack. And it's quite difficult to sort of, examine that from a different perspective and sort of stay sane, I guess, in the broader question. The best thing I can suggest is the first thing is to be organized. That is the 100% easiest thing to do with this kind of stuff. Because if you're on track, you're organized with everything and you can sort of step back and look at it from a different picture. You can say, okay, I've got the deadline. I know exactly what needs to be done. We're going to space things out so that we do have room for error, but we've also got enough time to obviously check things if things do go wrong. The second best thing that I can suggest is also just thinking about why you're doing this. Obviously, a lot of the projects that we are involved in are very heavily community related. And the cause of like the actual impact of all of these resources going out to some of these, new emerging communities that are very vulnerable at this time of the year, especially with COVID-19. So I think it's definitely important to step back and think, okay, this is definitely very stressful. There's a few things going through my mind and there's a few things not working right. But if we can just push through and we can get this resource to the client at the end of the day, it's going to make a huge impact on everyone that actually reaches these resources.
So I'm going to get Andrea to move on to the next slide, but you've touched on a few things there that I don't know whether people actually realize. So you're the meat in the sandwich, Travis. Is that fair to say? Because you've got the client who not only doesn't understand translation, but potentially doesn't care. You've got at the other end of the spectrum, you've got translators, interpreters, communities, desktop publishers, IT people, all kinds of people that you have to manage. So what you're seeing on the screen now, everyone, is like a visual representation of key elements of a successful project planning. And it looks simple enough, but of course it isn't. Travis, could you take us through that wheel of what we do at our end? So I'm hoping that people will now get a full picture of what happens, at Polaron First of all, in terms of managing everyone's expectations, because, like I said, the client purchases something, and for them, it's potentially a transaction or some sort of a way of ticking boxes, even sometimes, yeah. I mean, a lot of our clients are genuinely committed and engaged in developing really good resources. So they remember that at the end of every single project, there's a person that has health needs or legal needs. And when we present information to them, it's not just about ticking boxes, but more to the point, empowering people that are reading our stuff. And I think that's one of the things I'd like our translators and interpreters to remember, that your translation doesn't end when you finish the project. That's actually the beginning of the journey of your work, where you've developed something that works for communities, for humans, for real people, right? So take us through that wheel that we've got on the screen, please, Travis.
Awesome, no worries at all. So yeah, basically the first thing we do obviously is we have the stakeholder needs. So we've got the organization as a whole. This is where we obviously organize some communication with the client. We get a better understanding of what their values are and what their objectives are. And then we can then base that and mold that towards the project or the translations that they are requiring. So that moves on secondly straight to the project objectives. So this is where we get down to the nitty gritty, and we really try to understand exactly what they want out of this project. Obviously their target audience, how they're looking to best communicate with those cold communities, and basically just drum it all down so know exactly what needs to be done and how we can best achieve it. So once we've actually got all of the project objectives outlined, it's very, very easy to go through and assess deadlines for this. Now, this is something that I want everyone to take into consideration, is that there are different variations in deadlines. Obviously, you've got your very common standard turnaround times where we have a bit more flexibility. And then you've got some projects that actually are very quite strict, and we need to make sure that we're achieving these project objectives, we're making sure we're reaching these stakeholder needs, but they all need to be within a certain time frame. Once we've had everything evaluated and we're all ready to start production, we go through and use a project schedule. So you'll see an example later on in the slideshow of a project planner that myself and my colleagues use to plan these projects. We'll basically filter in all of the languages, all of the deadlines and different steps in a process, so we can get a clear overview on our screen exactly how it's going to take place and what moving parts we need to have completed by certain dates. Moving on to the next one that perfectly explains that. This is where we go a bit more in depth into each section. I'm going to go, okay, so this person's going to be conducting this part of the project. What are their roles and responsibilities? Again, linking that back to things like stakeholder needs and getting the overall objectives of this project down pat so that everyone is communicated with effectively and everybody knows exactly what needs to be done. Obviously, it's all good talking about roles, responsibilities, and objectives, but we need to make sure we have to be realistic, and we need to make sure it's in with budget. So this can be quite simple in terms of the quotation process, because when we go through these, when we go through the pricing for the client, we're very aware of these sort of things like the objectives and how long it's going to take, so we can price accordingly and basically set us up for success. Communication plan is not so much something that's a physical thing. It's more so just the interactions that we have and the communication and how we get across with both our vendors and the client itself. This is something that you would have heard of me speak many times in webinars in the past, and it's something that I cannot stress enough, which is communication with your project manager. There's no real need to hide anything from us. If you can be as transparent with us as possible, there might be some times where you need to deliver something a bit late, or there might be a specific term that, that you're struggling on a little bit. It doesn't hurt to give us a call or an email. We're definitely there to assist you, because it's all going to go back to the client anyway. So we want to make sure we're getting everything right. So finally, we have the tracking and management tools. So that's basically also in reference to the project schedule itself, but it's also sort of an evaluation method that we use at the end of projects. Because obviously once everything has been completed, there needs to be some quality assurance in all of this. We need to make sure that obviously things are on time, but we need to make sure that all of the objectives and the sort of notes that we prepared earlier on have all been followed to the T, so we can make sure that everything that the client wants is basically on track and completed. Obviously, you can see it's in a very circular motion, so everything basically comes back to the client. So when we're talking about project budget, we're talking about communication, talking about project schedule, this all comes back to the client, and it all needs to be in line with what their values and objectives are.
And Travis, of course, it doesn't matter what project you work on and who works on a project. We should, anybody that manages any kinds of projects should have some sort of a framework to be able to manage them, so that it's predictable. It's better to have a plan, even if it's imperfect, than no plan. So we've got about 85 people watching us, which is an amazing number. So my message to you is, and I used to work as a freelancer, and goodness, you had so many priorities, work coming, left, right, and center. If you organize yourself better and have a project plan, which we'll see in a moment, the chance of success and managing stress are higher than not. So, Travis, I'm going to get you to talk us through this tree of what happens behind the scenes, I guess, when it comes to project management. So whether you're building a house or translating a birth certificate, the principles are still the same, are they not?
100% agree with you there, Eva. With everything like you've mentioned, there has to be a project and there has to be a plan. Because if you're able to set yourself up for success, like we've spoken about, it's a lot easier to have things planned out. As you just mentioned before, better to have a plan than no plan at all. And I think it's a lot easier to look at some of these key terms like integration, scope, and risk, just seeing it from a broad perspective. When you actually break it down, like it's been done on this image, you can actually see some of the underlining factors that are actually involved. So we'll start from the top there, obviously with integration. So we have things like developing project plans and directing and managing the project work. So this is basically about all of those different elements that I spoke about on that aged care safety and quality commission job that we spoke about. Obviously, you got things like video editing, you got things like voice recording, how do these all work together and how can we best plan everything so it all runs smoothly as a process? Scope is obviously one thing that we need to constantly do, but it's more so important at the start of a project. We need to be able to make sure that we're able to define everything before we start things and we're doing things for a specific reason. There's nothing worse than going down a track or going through a project where there's a few gray areas and you're not too sure and you're sort of just making up things on the fly, because this tends to be where some issues can come in. Time is also a huge factor, which I think a lot of people underplay, because it's essentially what everything's based on. We've got specific deadlines and things do take time, especially when we're talking about quality. So we don't want to compromise any of those activities or any of those procedures, because we're very much about ensuring the best quality to our clients. Cost is something that's also very huge. We need to make sure that we're obviously within budget for all of our projects, and that we're actually able to control everything to a certain degree to make sure that everything runs as smoothly as possible. Now, going back to the left side there, we have stakeholders. So we've got to understand that all of this is going back to the client, and we need to understand that to sort of separate yourself from the project itself and think about, okay, what am I going to do with this project and how can I do it to the best of my ability? Because we need to make sure that when we're completing these tasks and we're going through and planning out everything accordingly, that the client's needs are always number one. Procurement is also another big thing there as well. We need to make sure that we're planning with procurement. We need to make sure we're planning accurately and correctly. When it comes to making sure that we can, control things that are out of our hand and we can plan these things before something that actually happens, is something that I think is something that you've touched on obviously before, Eva, as well, when it comes to just making a plan. It might not be the best thing, things are going to require improvement over time. But if you can just get a baseline started and you can have those plans involved, you're definitely going to see an increase in quality of your work. There's also carries through a risk, obviously, with these types of projects. So we need to basically do a whole analysis of, okay, what are the risks going to be involved in this project? How am I going to deal with it when it actually happens? And how to best control that. If we're able to step back, and it's basically a risk scope of what's going to happen to make sure we define and understand what's going to happen if something does go wrong and how we can best avoid that situation from happening. Communication, I keep saying it and I love saying it, is the most important thing of them all. We need to make sure that we're being very clear in our communication, not only just with the client, but also with your PMs and vendors. We need to be able to understand exactly what's happening with the project, especially when we're managing, somewhere between 15 to 20 projects. If one chain in that link breaks, it's very, very difficult to sort of keep on top of. So that's why honesty and transparency is the biggest thing we look for. Human resources is also another aspect there as well, because we need to actually step back and look at the development team ourselves. We have to look at how we can best deal with our vendors and our clients. We need to make sure that we're approaching everything in a manner that makes sure everything is completed on time, but we also need to develop and improve on projects. And quality is one thing that we do strive for as a huge quality there. because we need to make sure we're doing definitely tons of quality assurance methods when it comes to, evaluating a project at the end of it. Even taking, 20 to 25 minutes or however long it may take to just step back and go, okay, I've done this project. What were some of the pros? What were some of the cons? What was something that I could potentially improve upon? Are there any skills that I'm missing? And really get down to the nitty gritty and understand if we can improve anything for the long run.
And Travis, we do have a client who we absolutely love, but she's very demanding. Okay, so this is someone that's a lawyer, and she orders from us just vital records, so birth certificates, employment certificates, that kind of stuff. But she's very, very particular, and she gives us a lot of feedback, and sometimes we don't feel like that feedback is welcome, but it actually is, because what does it help us do? Maybe you could take us through, situations where we do receive feedback, we're busy, but yet we are striving towards making a better quality, not just transaction, but the entire exchange.
Of course, of course. And I think, yeah, one thing that we've touched on in many webinars before, especially when it comes to feedback, is you can't take it personally. They're not doing it for the benefit of attacking you directly. They're not trying to, to hurt your feelings in any way, shape, or form. It's basically, obviously, we have different perspectives and people see different things. So when we take that feedback on board, we need to make sure that we're keeping a very open mind when it comes to these resources, and it actually improves us in the long run. Because like she's just mentioned there, yeah, it can be quite stressful at times when you've got clients that are very, very demanding, and sometimes some of the requests don't seem very reasonable. But when we're actually able to take that feedback on board and apply it to and think, okay, maybe there was something that could have improved in that job, it's not only going to make our lives a lot easier in the future when we need to do these processes again, but it's actually going to make a lot of our other jobs seem a lot easier. Because when we're talking about quality assurance methods, it's a lot easier to basically go from a learning experience where you go, okay, there was something that was wrong in that project, or there was something that could have been done better. I'm going to make sure to never do it again in the future. So it's also a very good learning experience.
Well, that's right. And I think it's another opportunity to educate people as well. Because we, doing translations or project management day in, day out, we don't think of it in terms of being able to explain it. So sometimes when someone gives you feedback, immediately you kind of feel defensive, because it might have been something that we've worked on for 2 months, and all of a sudden someone's got an issue with it, and they're not always right? So a very key element of all of this is to be able to explain calmly and professionally about what went wrong, if it did go wrong, but also what if it didn't. So you need to be able to back up your quality procedures and say, well, actually, thank you very much for your feedback firstly, but that's how this particular language works. That's why we use these particular words, and what you've provided us with is an opinion, and we very much respect it, but this is what we think should happen. So it's about, managing those expectations and that feedback between different stakeholders. So you might have a client that's got an opinion, and they went off and got their colleague that speaks Punjabi to check something, and they, thought, okay, well, I want to improve this translation, but what they've provided us with is actually not just unhelpful, but distracting. And then you have to communicate that information to the translator, who's like, oh my God, I've got 20 years of experience in this, and what have you done? So, managing those different expectations is of course, a challenge. So we're going to move on to the next slide, where we're going to talk about the 10 ingredients of a successful translation project from our point of view. And we would like you, those 85 people or so that are listening to us, to think of yourself as our colleagues and as our team members, because essentially that's what happens. And a great PM such as Travis is, of course, the key ingredient to all of this, because he is the guy that knows everything about everything, and he is the one that is ultimately responsible to the person that's purchased the service from us. What I'm going to do now is get Travis to talk us through those 10 points. Well, 9, because the first one, a great PM, I've already covered.
Thank you so much for your kind words, Eva. So the second thing we have is also scoping out the project and planning early. This also goes back to a few things that's already been mentioned today. One, it's better to have a plan than no plan at all. We need to make sure we're scoping out all of these things, like our clients' needs, like the project objectives. We need to make sure that everything is planned so that we can basically just stick to that. It's going to make your life a lot less stressful, and it's going to make sure that everything is very much smooth sailing from when it begins, if you're able to identify everything from the get-go. Document everything religiously. This is also a huge thing, going back to when Eva was talking about feedback. When we get feedback, say in 6 months' time from something that's been completed, obviously a while ago, we need to be able to make sure that we're documenting every single step that we do. So we're able to go back to those clients that come back with some feedback and say, okay, these are the quality assurance methods that were put in place. This is what was done during that time. So it's a lot easier for you to clarify any issues that may come your way. So knowing your stakeholders and including your team, and obviously allocating appropriate resources. So this is also going back to the client again, as well as the vendors themselves. So we obviously need to understand that at the end of the day, it is the client's decision, and we need to make sure we're, adhering to everything as best as we can. But we need to make sure that we're allocating and enabling them to get the best resources possible. This is a huge thing that happens obviously at the commencement of the project. We need to make sure that we're being very transparent with our clients to say, okay, we reviewed the source document, we've been in touch with some of our translators, and this might not translate so well, or maybe we could phrase this in a different way so it has a better reach for the community. So this is definitely an important consideration to have. And understanding and mitigating risk. So a brilliant point that I spoke to a couple of weeks ago with Eva was, one thing she brought up was very interesting, was when we're talking about understanding and mitigating risk, is that you can have a 99% translation project that's 100% perfect. But if we're talking about a phone number that's actually not inserted correctly, it's very difficult for these people to reach out and access this information. So this is where it comes into understanding what's at stake, stepping back and going, okay, this is the implications of such an important project. I need to make sure when I'm going through and translating everything that I have reason behind what I'm doing, and I'm able to quality check everything to make sure when it's delivered to the client that everything is at its top shape.
That's right. So just going back to risk there, just briefly, I guess the point that we're trying to make to everybody is this, that, and when I was working in the freelance world, there was many pressures from different providers, from, direct clients and everybody. And it's really easy to make a mistake.
100%.
But there are mistakes, and there are that are really important, such as phone number. So if you get the phone number wrong on a brochure, you might as well not translate anything, because it's not fit for purpose, basically. So broken links, when you're referring to a website, or key terms such as COVID being mistranslated, that is a lot more important than polishing the text so that it sounds like Shakespearean English or whatever it is, right? So in managing risk, I think for translators, that's a really important consideration to look at, in terms of, okay, where do I allocate my resources if we are stretched? What are some of the things that we need to check and double check? And, the other thing I always say is that you're only as good as your last translation, really. So that is why internally, before anything gets sent out to the client, we check, we have checklists basically to ensure that things that are key elements of the translation are checked and proofread and, reported on, I guess. So that if, there's an issue of quality, they are not these key elements that would essentially render the translation unusable, right? Because if it's just a turn of phrase, yep, you can have an opinion, great, yes, we can fix it. But if it is a phone number, someone's name, a date that's incorrect, and somebody goes off and prints 100,000 copies of something, that's where the risk lies. So we have to weigh those things up. So point 6, be flexible and continuously improve, Travis.
Thank you for that. So yeah, this is also going back to the feedback that we spoke about. So we need to make sure, obviously, during a project that we're very flexible with things like timelines and obviously taking into consideration clients' feedback. But also going back to feedback, you need to make sure you're not taking it personally. You need to understand that they're just trying to do it for the best of the translation. We want to make sure that these messages are being done as best as they can. So we need to use that as basically an obstacle for improvement. It's always about personal development and learning from different experiences that come, because you're never really going to have too many projects that are the same. Managing stress is something that we touched on before as well. Basically, to summarize the 3 key points for that, just to make sure that you're very well organized, which will definitely reduce the amount of stress levels you have. Take a moment to take a step outside and really think about the client, and think about, ways that you can maybe make it easier for you and them in terms of the understanding of a message. And definitely just, taking a step back and going, okay, what am I actually doing this for? What's actually going to be the result of this? These resources are going to help so many different people. So, it's definitely worth putting in the time and effort.
Travis, I wanted to
Oh,
touch on a word that you used there as client. So, because I once used to be a freelancer, I know that agencies are evil and people don't think of us as clients, right? But it's really important for translators, interpreters to think of us as clients. And I cannot emphasize it enough because that makes it for a better relationship, doesn't it?
no, that's 100%. I definitely agree with that. Especially when we're talking about basically, because we are essentially the middleman in this service. So we need to make sure that when you're not going to pass on something to the client that you wouldn't pass on to us, essentially. So if we are talking about, looking at us as the client in this instance, you need to make sure that everything that you would think about in terms of the client's perspectives and objectives is a very similar process that you have to do with us. And that definitely leads on perfectly to the next point there of clear and communication. Because we want to make sure that obviously you're going to be very clear and communicating the message that's being done, obviously within the translation itself, but be very open with us. Again, you're probably sick of me hearing me say it, but we want honesty and we want clear communication. That's the only advice I can offer you. Coming under budget and on time is also a huge aspect as well, because when I talk about things coming into play that might, perhaps client changes of a certain document, or we talk about things not being done on time, or maybe taking a little bit of extra time. This is where that communication comes into play perfectly, because if we're able to understand these things ahead of time, it's a lot easier for us to be proactive than it is for us to be reactive and go, okay, we're in a bit of trouble here. We're going to have to try and pin some things and move things around. And finally, we always need to make sure we have a plan B, because we need to prepare for things when they obviously don't happen correctly. After every project that's been completed, we need to make sure that we are debriefing on everything, assessing that thing again of pros. We need to understand the cons and things that we can improve on, evaluate these methods. And the most importantly thing is celebrate for crying out loud. We need to make sure that,
Yeah.
we've done a really good job. We've looked at this. It's going to help so many different people at the end of the day. We've actually done a huge contribution to society and the community. So, let's be proud of our efforts.
Yeah, and I think that celebrate beach is something we don't do enough of. I think often, and I'm also seeing the questions that we've received, which we'll move on to in a moment, but we often concentrate on the negative because we do get a fair bit of feedback or criticism, or are unable sometimes to back up our point of view, right? So that's something that we try and have built into our processes. That is why we co-design our translations with the community, because those of you that have worked in language services for a while, that you'll know that there are issues of literacy, there are issues of education, there are issues of the source text, there are issues of feedback that a well-meaning client comes to you and cannot explain properly. So we have to navigate all that. But at the end of the day, I think if you can show clients that these are the quality processes that I've applied, this is the methodology that I've used, this is my project plan, then they can have the confidence that actually, yes, there's a process behind the scenes and we didn't just sit there and make it up as we went along. So I think that celebration aspect is really something that's quite important. And because, I often talk about translation and interpreting as an essential service, and we don't think of ourselves enough in those terms. Just in terms of who will benefit from the work that we do. Okay, so it's not about the governmental authority being able to tick off boxes. It's not about us feeling great about a brochure looking fancy. It's about us communities that read this information or hear this stuff and use it to be informed and to be engaged and to participate in a civic society. I think that's a very, very important point that I want us to remember, because the whole purpose of everything that we do is that at the end of every translation, there's a person that's going to find it useful or not. And we hope that they do. But in terms of being able to explain how you work and explain the quality processes that you have and the project management process we have, that's something that we as an industry need to lift. And we can't hide behind labels and say things like, well, I'm not certified. That is not enough. Like the education that companies like us are doing with the clients means that they now understand a lot more than what they did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. And they are looking for more than your stamp, NATI stamp. And yeah, it's challenging, but we hope that at the end of that process, the communities or the people, the humans that read your stuff and watch your videos that have been translated benefit from. Next slide. All right, what's a project planner, Travis?
This is going back to what I mentioned in some of the earlier slides. This is basically our bread and butter when it comes to projects. This is our main thing for keeping track of. Obviously, you can see on the screen there, we've got our translators, obviously the different vendors that we use on a project, making sure they're doing the correct languages that we set out. And then we have this massive space that allocates for each section, breaking it down. So obviously we need to understand when a project starts, when we're going to deliver it, and split them up accordingly so we can actually keep track of them a lot more effectively. Because instead of just putting a project start and delivery date and then just in my head along the way going, yeah, that'll work, we'll put it there, it'll all be okay. It's not very effective in any way, and there's definitely a lot of room for error. So during this time, we make sure before we send out our POs, before I send out our translation projects, we've got everything in front of us, so it's all planned perfectly.
Right. Okay. And the benefits of effective project management. Could you take us through that just briefly?
Yes. So the biggest thing is obviously job satisfaction. I feel like I've touched on that point before when, when something's planned very well accordingly and everything does go to plan and we do have that time to obviously celebrate what we've completed, it's obviously very satisfying at the end of the day. Because looking at all these amazing messages, all this content that we're creating to help reach those vulnerable communities, I can definitely say even from the COVID-19 pandemic that's happening now, I barely understand what's going on and I speak perfect English and I can't understand what people would be like in terms of understanding the situation if they don't speak little to none. Better translation is also a huge thing that comes into mind. Obviously, if we're making sure that our quality assurance methods are refined and we're making sure we're putting in the best effort we can, it's definitely going to reflect in the actual outcome of this and how the messages are communicated. This entail leads to obviously a good reputation, and we're actually able to contribute to the industry as a whole. One thing that you just touched on there, Eva, in relation to sort of the industry sort of slow movement to go towards, okay, we don't just want to tick boxes anymore. We don't just want to just get that stamp. We're looking for a bit more out of a translation. And this is something that, if we're putting in that effort for the quality assurance, we're satisfied with the job at the end, it's definitely going to replicate to how the clients feel. Going back to that greater efficiency, we can see 3 lovely little dollar signs there. We're able to get stuff done a lot quicker and a lot easier. This comes back to the planning aspect that we keep preaching. It's so very important to make sure that everything is planned upon, so you can manage your workload effectively, and you'll actually find in the long term you'll get better at these processes and you'll complete stuff quicker. This leads to fewer complaints in the future because everything has been done to the best of your ability, and you won't be stressed out when you see an email come through about feedback. You understand, okay, I actually have put the effort in with this project. I know exactly what I've done. I can back up everything that I've done. So I'm not stressed at all.
Well, thank you, Travis. And then moving on to, we wanted to provide you, the audience, with some tips about how to essentially work better with your clients. And it doesn't matter who your client is, whether it's us at Polaron, some other translation company, or whether you're working with clients directly. Travis, what are some of the ways that you recommend that people can improve the communication and at the end of the day, their efficiency and also better outcomes?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll just touch base with the ones that we've got on the screen first, and then I'll go off into a few ones that I can already think of in my mind. So one thing that we've already got through, is honesty and transparency, and you're open to feedback. Like we've mentioned before, it's never personal when it comes to feedback, and it's actually going to benefit you in the long run. So if you're able to just relay this information to us, make sure that we're both on the same page, it's going to be 100% easier when we communicate that out to the client. We want to make sure that we're being solution focused, helpful, and timely in everything that you do. Obviously, this goes back to the efficiency and the effectiveness of a project. We need to make sure that we're, okay, I want to get this done as quick as possible, but I want to get it done in the right way. Because there's no point getting something done, obviously, in both sides. There's no point getting something done too quickly and we're compromising the quality a bit, or taking forever to do something and it may not be the best project at the end of it and it's taken, a long time to complete. pick up the phone. This is a huge one.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you might have a lot of feedback to give on a checker or on a translations project. Give us a call. That's what they're there for. We're in the day and age where we can be in contact and discuss something over in less than 5 minutes. So if you've got any queries at all in relation to a project, you might just need a little bit of time, and it's a bit difficult to write the email and tell me exactly why. Just pick up the phone and give us a call. We'll definitely clarify everything over the phone. Communicate and over communicate. I've never ever heard of an email that's come through too many times. You can't send me 10 emails, although I might look at my email inbox and go, okay, there's a lot of emails in there. But it's a lot easier for me to understand and go, okay, you know what? I can see the effort you're putting in. I can see that you're going above and beyond to make sure everything's clarified and make sure everything's understood, which makes everything a lot easier in the long run. And most importantly, have fun. You can probably tell just by my personality now that I'm all about having fun. At the end of, you have to do something that you enjoy. You have to be able to complete a project to the best of your ability, but you also need to have fun doing it. So, add a few different variations in how you complete some projects that might make it more enjoyable. Even for your communication with us, we don't have to keep it strictly professional. We do want to get to know you guys a lot more and develop those relationships. So I'm happy to have, I'm sort of striving for a more stripped down sort of, where we can essentially be friends, because that's basically what it's all about at the end of the day.
Cool. And then we have some more tips. Yes, how does that relate to you? So maybe if you could take us through, Travis, about how you support your translators and your interpreters, and how we do want them to feel part of the team, and how to make themselves indispensable, which is interesting. I want to hear more about that.
Certainly. So going back to that point of like a domino effect, when we're talking about that aged care project that I mentioned, when we've got 75 plus people working on a project, you're all part of a team. You need to make sure that you're all working together collaboratively, and need to understand that some of the actions that are being undertaken are going to have a cause and effect. You don't want to make your fellow industry workers' life much harder. Because one thing that you can probably relate to is that you wouldn't want it on the same end. You wouldn't want something coming to you that's obviously a lot more difficult, and you've got to spend that extra time dealing with it. So there's no point in doing that to your to your colleagues. Your work is valued. This is one thing that's definitely underplayed, and I don't think you guys get enough credit for some of the work you do. Some of the deadlines that you do have to work around, some of the topics, you're expected to be an expert in some fields that most people can only dream of, and you're able to assess projects with such ease and do it on a consistent basis. And we do very much appreciate you, and you need to understand that it's not going unnoticed. Your translations are fit for purpose, and they assist people. Again, going back to that thing, why are we really doing this? What is the point of this translations project? How many people is it going to help? I can probably relate to a few of the projects that have come through in the past, thinking, what, if I was in that situation, I couldn't understand what it would be like without some of these resources. So it's important to make sure you know why you're completing your projects, and that will give you that extra bit of motivation to do everything better. You're going to grow professionally and personally. This is a huge thing that we've spoken about in our past webinars when we're talking about marketability. So you're able to obviously improve based off all the feedback and all of the processes that you learn through a translations project. And not only just for us, it's going to make you appear a lot more favorable to other providers, because you're going to go through and go, okay, you know what, they're actually going through and going above and beyond what other translators are doing. Why would we not want to have them involved? So it's definitely going to result in, I know what a lot of you like to hear, which is more work, which I'm sure everybody loves. Your PM loves working with you. Hell yeah, we do. And you make yourself indispensable. So we're not here to just go through a checklist and say, you know what, I'm just going to use this person for this job, this one here. I'm not really worried about, consistency or anything. We absolutely love working with you guys. Some of the things that I can see accomplished on a day-to-day basis is actually quite extraordinary. And going back to that point of, your work is valued at the end of the day. We are definitely thankful for all the work that you commit. And it's not just like we're going to, throw you in the bin one day. You're definitely around to stick for a long time. You guys are not going anywhere. And we want to make sure that you understand that.
That's cool. We have heaps of questions. So I'll summarize everything we've said, and then I'll hand over to Andrea for questions. But these are just a few sort of final messages that what you heard from Travis today and from me is that sometimes it's a race, other times it's like a marathon. In any case, a project has a defined start, middle, and finish. and you're part of it. So what Travis was, I guess, explaining, and what I've contributed at times, is that with a good plan, good training, and a good coach or a project manager, we're going to get there faster and you'll be more consistent. And having that good relationship with whoever you work with, whether it's your client or a project manager, and understanding, and hopefully after today's session, you can understand that when you work with 100 people on a project that's got stressful deadline or massive workload is not that easy. So take heart, Travis. We were listening. And we really wanted to emphasize that even though there's so many moving parts in that machine called project translation project, you're not just a cog. We don't see you as dispensable. So over to you, Andrea, now, because I can see that we have a lot of questions. So go for it.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. That was a great presentation. Yeah, we did receive a lot of questions here from the Facebook page and also in the webinar. So the first question will be, how does the current COVID situation impact your work? I mean, working from home, communication, but also in terms of business.
Okay. So I'm gonna take that one. So first of all, it's bloody hard. Let me tell you, it's bloody hard because so a lot of translators have always worked from home. So this is something you're used to. But what we miss the most is that team, what I call a conversation, being able to see who's working on what and where we can step in and where we can help. So that's a massive challenge, but I think we're managing that really well. So on your screen there, you can see our project managers that work at Polaron at the moment. We've got Marie, who's just joined us a few weeks ago. So the challenge is to look after everybody as a manager, and the challenge for me is to look after everybody. I'm not a Mother Teresa, but I still want everyone to be happy, and it's hard. Like we have to acknowledge that it's really hard in Melbourne. We're now in this ridiculous lockdown. Not ridiculous from the point of view that we don't need to do it, but it is hard because we cannot meet, we cannot. Simple things like we cannot print things off. So, for example, one of the things that we do as part of quality control when we develop brochures, we print it off because checking things off screen is harder. We don't have printers at home, for example. So that, there's lots of elements like that that make things harder. But we have never been this busy. We have never been this busy, ever, 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 ever. So there's something that resonates with the market that we do, and we're extremely pleased that the effort and the education and the telling people how things should be done is finally working. So that's a personal satisfaction for all of us. So for Agatha, for Travis, for Marie, that does mean more work, but it also means that people are finally seeing and recognizing the fact that don't waste your money on translations, do it well. And what was the other question, Andrea? And how we are doing? Look, we're doing well. We're just working pretty hard. So that's where we're at.
Thank you. Next question is related to communication. So sometimes my schedule is a lot more or a lot busier than other times. How can I communicate this to my project manager but not lose future work?
So firstly, I'll say that we don't ever punish people for telling us, you know what, I've just taken on too much. Can I have an extension? So we don't, blacklist people or, we don't have a Monday morning meeting saying, well, that translator is never going to work with us again. If we understand what's going on for you, yeah. But if you disappear and we don't, you just need to communicate honestly. So we understand, especially now that people are stressed, stretched, and, it's a very different environment. We've never had to go through this before. So if you pick up that phone, as Travis said, and say to us, look, on this occasion, I cannot do it. We will understand. And there's no punishment for that. Honestly, we do want to support you. But if you're not coping and you're not telling us, then we don't know. Like on occasion, very, very rarely, because we have, a team of very trusted and reliable translators that we have been working with, some of them for 20 years. So that's a long time. And we see you more as colleagues and as friends than sort of disposable contractors. But if we don't know what's going on for you, we can only guess that you don't care, right? So talk to us and we can always work it out. It's really good to have a buddy. It's really good to have a colleague in your language pair where you know, sometimes if you can't cope or something comes up, you can ask them to help you and vice versa. So I would say, you know, talk to us if we can, we'll support you, but don't disappear and don't sit there worried. It's better to pick up that phone and tell us what's going on.
Thank you, Eva. As a freelancer, I am sometimes commissioned to do a translation project by an agency. And then when I submit it, the PM says, okay, pass your invoice onto the client, for whom I don't have any details. And it's up to them to pay you. What's your perspective on this?
Never. Don't work with people like that again. So we talked about clients, and we are your client. We are responsible for the payment, right? The contractual agreement is with us. You shouldn't care who we on-sell it or who our clients are. You know, I cannot put it any simpler. But essentially, you know, the transaction, the arrangement, the contract, even if you don't have a written contract, is with the people that purchase the translation from you. You know, there shouldn't be any third parties involved. We sometimes get that from clients, from our clients, where we will get, oh, you know, I'm waiting for my client to pay. No. You are our client. I don't care. But, you know, sometimes being assertive and explaining that is, of course, a challenge. But I just wouldn't work with people that aren't respecting that arrangement, because really, at the end of the day, the contract is between you and the person that has got your translation. The other thing to do with people like that is this method, which I used to apply when I was freelancing. Here's your translation. Can I have my money? Right? That's what I would say.
All right, thank you. Next question from Rosemary. How do you manage errors or mistakes made by the client in the source document?
Travis, what would your advice be?
So when we're talking about managing errors and mistakes in source documents, it's very important for us to make sure that we're clarifying this at the start. Obviously, we need to make sure we're reviewing documents before this is conducted. So even just a simple thing of reviewing the source document before you start translating. So you go through, you read the source, you get an understanding of what's actually going to be portrayed and the message that's being communicated. And you can go, hey, this doesn't read correctly. Can you get back to the client so they can update it as soon as possible? When we're talking about huge projects like community approved translations, where I've mentioned obviously 100+ vendors, it is extremely difficult to go through that process once it's been communicated at the bottom end of the project. So if I get told at the end of it that there is a small word that hasn't been written correctly or not in the right sentence or translated properly at the community checking level, as opposed to at the very start when we can fix everything a lot easier, it becomes a lot more difficult. And when we talk about managing timelines and overall managing stress, it's a lot easier for us to manage those mistakes once they're discovered at the start. So probably in summary for that, make sure that obviously once you've got a document, make sure you review it before you commence translation, and just communicate with us. Anything that comes up that could be a potential error, it might be nothing. It might be something as simple as a number that you think is incorrect or something that shouldn't be there. We're able to clarify everything for you.
And of course, it also depends on what we're talking about, what the source document is, because if you can see that there's an error in a birth certificate, it's not something you can correct. So you'd go by the source document, and you would, you know, I would advise the client that there's a mistake in their name or a birth date or whatever it is. And sometimes you cannot correct it. But, you know, there are ways of handling that where potentially you could put a translator's note or something like that. But if it is a mistake in a document that say a brochure, then there's a different process to a you know, finding mistakes or alerting the client than if it is on a document. But there's another level to all this, and that is, you know, mistakes introduced by clients' checkers or feedback that's provided to us that's incorrect. That's another kettle of fish, and we'll have another session about that. But I think, you know, just to summarize what Travis says is just let the client know that this is the case. Or if we are your client, let us know and we'll manage that for you.
Thank you so much. Salim would like to know the meaning of industry ecosystem.
Well, I think we often forget that we are a market, that we are an industry, that we are a profession. So somehow I find that sometimes we put these blinkers on where we think that we're completely unique and separate from everything, but that's just not the case. There are many dependencies, and we are an ecosystem. So we have translators, we have translation companies or agencies, if you want to call them. We have clients, we have governments. So that's the ecosystem. And, in the last few years, there have been a lot of changes to that ecosystem. For example, with NAATI certification changes, with technology. So it's about how we all coexist that we need to think about. So when I said industry ecosystem, that's what I meant.
And finally, Eva and Travis, the translation industry currently is in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons, unfortunately. Based on what you just presented, how do you think Polaron can influence this positively?
Okay, the only way we can influence it is to do the right thing. So I know what you're talking about, and I've read it. And there was a few issues with that article that I thought were particularly unhelpful. One was that the translation company in question for this particular project wasn't even interviewed. Why not? Where is their name, right? Why aren't we, so there's a faceless government department, there are faceless translators, everything's so opaque that you can't hold people accountable. What I would do if I was that journalist, I'd go back to the source and say to the translation company, okay, what sort of procedures do you have in place? How did this happen? And actually what happened was a typesetting error, nothing to do with translation. And, to have someone's opinion who is great, they're bilingual, to say this was nonsensical and ridiculous or whatever it is, they said, tell me why. Why are you saying this? Give me a linguistic explanation for what you're saying. If you don't, that's just your opinion, with all due respect, right? And I think if we, that ecosystem that I just spoke about, if we're not transparent and, clear about who does what and how, then we have no hope of raising the industry standard. So we have been, for many years, sort of the lone voice of the industry saying, you cannot send translations done by one translator just because it's NAATI certified. We don't want to be this agency where we're just participating, this exchange of document. We receive it from the client, send it to translator, send it back to the client. That's not quality control. That's not adding value. So I think what we do, and we don't always get it right. So it's not like I can stand on the top of the mountain and say we're wonderful, fantastic, and everything's hunky dory. It isn't. Yeah, it's all work in progress. But I think if we can get to the point where we know who the translators are, we know who the translation companies are. What process do they have in place other than NAATI certification? Let's be honest about it. And also the government purchasing. One of the people interviewed in that article, I was really surprised that they were even allowed to speak, because they send their work overseas. So, looking in your own backyard. So in answer to your question, I think it's really important. Sorry, I get really hot under the collar, very passionate, you can tell. But I just think, be innovative and be honest about what you do. Throughout this presentation, what I've said, what Travis said, and what your questions have been, is about transparency and good communication. So I think at the end of the day, particularly in Victoria, you can see that the communication strategy to do with COVID, not very good. And whenever we come up with innovative solutions, people think that it's too hard, too expensive, it's going to take too long. It's not about that. We need that information now, not next week, not next year, now. And it's about how we all work as that ecosystem to deliver those messages to multicultural communities that are protecting all of us, because at the end of the day, it is a virus. And if people are left out of that conversation, guess what's going to happen? The cost of not translating things well is higher than investing money into doing it properly. So there you go. That's my lecture for you for today. Sorry. I think we've run out of time so badly that we have to probably finish. Last question, Andrea.
There's no more questions. Thank you, Eva and Travis.
No more questions. All right then.
No.
Well, hopefully everybody's enjoyed my lecture and my shouting with you. But I wanted to thank Travis very much for his presentations. Hopefully that's given you a look into what happens at our end, and some of the pressures, some of the stresses, and some of the wonderful things that we do. But what I wanted to leave you with is, honestly, let's celebrate the work that we do daily. I hope that you're feeling a little bit support it. We run the seminars once every month, and we try and put content to you that's useful. If you have any other ideas, please reach out. Perhaps there are topics that you'd like us to cover. But on your screen over there, you can see our Facebook page, our LinkedIn page, YouTube channel, and our website. So I wanted to thank everybody that's participated. Certainly Travis for presenting, certainly Andrea for being the brains behind the scenes, and everyone that spent the last 45 minutes with us. I hope you found it useful. See you next month.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eva. Thanks, Andrea. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.